Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this crazy week. We're glad to have an hour to sit here and look at some beautiful, really interesting work. So thanks for joining us. I'm excited for this one. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a senior associate and planner with Roadside and Harwell in Alexandria, Virginia. But I also work with the Sustainable Communities Division of APA, organizing webinars. And so today's webinar, as you can see, is centered on projects that have been awarded the division's Award for Excellence in Sustainability. We have 3 webinars we're doing this month, and one more today, and then the last one is next week. So today we're excited to have representatives from the EcoInnovation District Plan in Pittsburgh and the Heartwood Greenway system in Omaha, Nebraska. One note before I move on, if you're having any technical issues, just send me a note and I'll help you out once we get through the intro portion of the webinar here. Before we move on, I want to say thank you so much to all of our sponsors. You can see them here on the screen, but I'm going to read them as well. Our sponsors for this year include Clarion, Devon's Enterprise Commission, Dewberry, East End Land Planning, FAR Associates, HAF, Niche Engineering, Ideation Planning, Mars EOR, Robinson & Cole, Smith Group, Tesca, the University of Florida Online Masters of Urban and Regional Planning, the University of Utah Department of City and Metropolitan Planning, UrbanWorks, Urban EcoPlan, the Urban Collective, and VHB. So thank you so much to all of you for your support, and thank you to all of our division members as well. Speaking of the division and members, if you're interested in volunteering with the division, or if you have ideas for webinars or other activities, please reach out. I'm happy to talk with you about any ideas you might have for webinars. You can also find out more on our website, and then we'll keep this information up during the Q&A in case you want to jot it down. As I mentioned, today's webinar is focused on some of our award winners, and so I want to let you know that we have not yet posted the information for next year's awards, but it will be posted soon. So keep an eye out for the 8th annual awards announcement. We'll be using a process similar to last year with submission via web form. There might be some slight changes to categories, but otherwise the process will be fairly similar. So we hope you'll consider sending in some of your work, and we look forward to looking at it. If you want to get an update directly when we do post that information, you can either sign up for our e-bulletin on our blog site, or you can just send me an email. My email is listed here on the slide, and I promise I'll loop you in when we've got everything ready to go. So, on to today's webinar. As I said, we are thrilled to have 2 sort of award winners represented on the webinar today, the EcoInnovation District Plan and the Heartwood Greenway System. So I want to just spend a couple minutes here to introduce our speakers, and then I will hand it off to them. So first, representing the EcoInnovation District Plan, we have 2 folks. Andrew Dash is the Director of the Department of City Planning for the City of Pittsburgh. He has 18 years of experience as a planner, and in his role as director, he helps to set the vision and direction for 4 divisions and 1 office, including strategic planning, zoning and development review, sustainability and resilience, public art and civic design, and the Office of Community Affairs. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. And then Derek Dauphin is the planner for Pittsburgh's downtown, Hill District, Uptown, and Oakland neighborhoods. He was the project manager for the Uptown and West Oakland EcoInnovation District Plan, which is what they'll be talking about today. And he's also managed several subsequent implementation projects. On behalf of the Heartwood Greenway System team, we have several folks on the line today. The person you'll be hearing from most is David Meyer, who is the principal and founder of Meyer Studio Land Architects, or MSLA. In his 40-year career as a licensed landscape architect, he's been recognized for both his artistry and his ability to, quote unquote, build the hell out of stuff, which I really enjoy. He is also an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley and is a frequent traveling lecturer and critic. We have 3 other folks from MSLA on the line today. We have Nicole Kelly, who's a principal with MSLA, Eric Jensen, who's a senior associate with MSLA and was a project manager for the Heartwood Greenway system. And then Grace Edmondson is a designer with MSLA. We'll let them introduce more about themselves as we go. But before I fully hand off the presentation to the EcoInnovation District Plan, I just want to let you know how you can submit questions. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. We probably won't answer questions between the presentations, but we will get to them at the end. You can send them at any time. You don't have to wait until the end. Just use the Q&A function. You can find it in the little speech bubble with the question mark in, as you see here on the screen. If you'd rather use the chat box, you can send me a note. That's just fine. So with that, I will pass it off to Andrew and Derek.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon. My name is Andrew Dash. Like Jennifer said, I'm the director of the Department of City Planning here in the city of Pittsburgh, joined by Derek Dauphin, and we'll be talking about Pittsburgh's EcoInnovation District. I'll just give a quick intro as to who we are and what we do, talk a little bit more about neighborhood planning, which the EcoInnovation District was the first of the neighborhood plans that we adopted through the neighborhood planning program. And Derek will talk a lot more about implementation and where we're taking the plan. So just the department overall, very similar to many other departments of city planning, focus on land use, whether that be citywide policy that we work on relative to citywide comprehensive planning and other means, to things like the EcoInnovation District, which we're here to talk about today, creating zoning regulations and other policy for the city, and then working on kind of the beginning and design of projects that we do here in the city of Pittsburgh. There are roughly 40 to 45 of us across a number of divisions. So looking at large-scale policy, doing development review, working on climate action and sustainability initiatives, managing our public realm, and and leading engagement across the city for multiple types of projects. But we're here to talk a little bit more about neighborhood planning and specifically the Uptown EcoInnovation District. So these areas in gray that are on the screen were the first round of neighborhood plans that we had worked on. And and the first one of those was the EcoInnovation District, which covers the Uptown and West Oakland neighborhoods of the city. The Uptown and West Oakland neighborhoods are positioned right between downtown, the Central Business District, which is kind of at the confluence of the rivers, also known as the Golden Triangle, and then to the east is the Oakland neighborhood, which is our University District. These two areas are the second and third largest economic generators in the state of Pennsylvania, after Center City, Philadelphia. And so Uptown is right in the middle of those two. And in addition to that, it has its own institutions like Duquesne University. There is a University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is our health system hospital that's located in the neighborhood, and the hockey arena for the Pittsburgh Penguins is right on the fringe of the neighborhood as well. The two orange lines that you see on this map are the 5th and Forbes corridor. These are two of the major kind of arteries from downtown to east of the city, where the majority of our population is located. And what went on was that the city started to investigate a bus rapid transit system for that 5th and Forbes corridor. And as we began that process, there was a lot of concern from the community as to, what is it that they're getting? They have these, very large economic generators, which they have a lot of transit access to, and changing those roadways meant changing their community. And they wanted to make sure that any changes to their community were ones that benefited them as well. And so with that, we were able to get a Federal Transit Administration grant, begin the work of the EcoInnovation District Plan, and had identified from the community a series of issues that we were to address in the plan. So looking at traffic safety, look at environmental health, similar to to many neighborhoods on the fringe of downtown, few open spaces, areas where for a long time people had been buying up property but not doing development, and so that was leading to perceptions around safety, around lack of economic opportunity, around a place where many of the properties were not being developed, not being used to their highest and best use, and not being used in a way that was really benefiting the community. And so, knowing that as we started the process, we worked with the community and really focused on kind of two systems to develop the plan. The first being the eco districts protocol, and looking at kind of creating a plan that was formulated within that protocol, and having that help drive the process. The other being the emerging innovation economy, that some of which was starting to occur in the neighborhood, but also just being located between downtown and the Oakland district. That there was an understanding that a lot of that could be introduced in a more robust way to the neighborhood, and that the neighborhood wanted to be able to use that to get to its goals. So again, if you can see it, this map shows the uptown neighborhood. In addition to those large institutions, those large neighbors, there were a lot of community assets, and in the neighborhood, a lot of people working in the neighborhood. And so, a lot of project partners for us to be working with, both in the uptown neighborhood, people doing projects in the uptown neighborhood, and people, working around the uptown neighborhood. And so, in combination with them, the city led the EcoInnovation District process, really tried to work to engage and focus on trying to get down into the community. So whether that was, block parties that we were doing with food trucks, to concerts, to a handful, to a number of focus groups around different topics that residents cared about, really tried to get away from traditional public meetings. In fact, as a part of this, we did rent a space out in the community for a few months that served as a home base for the plan and for the project. While we were going through this, so that residents could, be able to stop in, to fill out a survey, to participate, in different ways. And then through that, we're able to develop the plan, and the main goals of the plan are here. Talking about kind of again using the eco districts model, looking at the environment, trying to make those connections, allowing everyone to benefit in an equitable way, looking at sustainability and understanding that there is a neighborhood here, and that there has been a neighborhood here, and that there's the opportunity for that neighborhood to grow, but that there were a lot of things and are a lot of things in the neighborhood that we wanted to make sure that we were celebrating, and that we were keeping in mind as we were thinking about development as it came. And so, to talk a little bit further about some of the actions out of the plan, and the actions from the plan itself, I'll turn it over to Derek.
Hi, everyone. So, as Andrew mentioned, one of the big issues coming into this plan was just the amount of speculation and the amount of land that had been underutilized. This map gives you an impression of that. There's lots of service parking lots being between downtown and Oakland. There's no shortage of people who want to park here. There's institutions, there's hospitals. So one of the big challenges was how to really reactivate that property, and that would also overcome some of the feelings that the neighborhood was unsafe and it was not worth investing in. So that was a major thing that came up again and again. We really did work through the details of bus rapid transit. So we came in with bus rapid transit, and for this community, they already had great transit access. They can walk to downtown, they can walk to the University District. So the goal was to come up with those additional benefits that they could see. And this rendering shows that they're getting more street trees. There's not a lot of street trees in the neighborhood, green infrastructure, safer crossings at intersections, and a whole host of improvements along this sort of 5th and Forbes corridor that really run through the middle of the neighborhood and connect to almost all parts of the neighborhood. One of the biggest ideas in there, again, is around greening and taking back some of the space that's been given up to roadways. So here you have a Boulevard of the Allies that is completely reimagined. The current one is all lanes of traffic and very little else. But in this case, what we've done is tried to claw back some of those lanes and create a very attractive pedestrian promenade that lines the community and connects it to the river. It's very disconnected from the river. It's very disconnected from the views that it has. So this would help to overcome that while reducing heat island effect. This grant also allowed us to dig into the details of energy. So during our planning process, we had an announcement that we were going to get a district energy plant by NRG, which is now Clearway, and that plant was built out sort of as the plan was wrapping up, and we were starting implementation. That plant that was actually going under construction. So we're thinking a lot about how do we extend those lines into the rest of the neighborhood? How do we increase the benefits of that new system, and then how do we add other things on top of that, like electrification of buildings, solar charging, other infrastructure, so that we could take maximum advantage of that. This was in the plan was one simple little thing, but it became a major piece of work for us, which was how do we use our land use system and zoning to implement the community's vision around affordability, equity, and sustainability. And so this map shows the existing zoning. It was a real hodgepodge, very heavily cut up neighborhood, and a lot of high aspirations in the plan. So how do we deal with the sort of limiters of the current zoning and create something that actually focuses on building performance and what it can achieve? So we did a couple of things just to bring the zoning up to date with where we thought it should be. One of those was really getting a lot more serious about stormwater improvements. So creating standards across the board so that even individual single-family homes have to think about their stormwater management, and a new standard around that. We did have a great partnership that we were sort of starting up at this point with the Green Building Alliance here in Pittsburgh, who runs our Pittsburgh 2030 district. And we're able to sign an agreement with them for them to do green building reviews for free for all major projects that come through the neighborhood. So that's been a great thing that we've been able to bring into this process and give people information at the earliest stage that we have it, so they can really influence the development. And then thinking about how we can slow down the demolition process so that we're getting projects and not just vacant lots that create more impervious area. We did dig into the details of parking. This is a neighborhood where most people walk or take transit, so we really wanted to flip the script on parking. So no more minimums, maximums were set. All new parking has to be convertible. It's in structures. It needs to be convertible to other uses. And then we really wanted new parking structures to come with benefits for the community. So that's what you're seeing here is a diagram that shows what that is. So in our zoning code, we created a menu of options, and all structured parking with 50 spaces or more has to build at least 3 of these things into the parking structure, whether that's EV charging or on-site renewables or bike share or neighborhood scale composting and recycling. The other thing that we did is we created a height bonus system, the performance point system. We did it a little differently. In this case, we looked at what was in the plan that we could implement through height bonuses and how much height we could give. So we set a minimum and a maximum height. And in part of the district that's nearest downtown, that height was 3 times as tall through the bonus system as it was allowed before we started. So people had a lot of height to earn. And then we looked at these 5 areas: energy efficient buildings, renewable generation, and connecting to that new district energy plant, providing affordable housing. That was so popular in the neighborhood that we actually doubled the amount of height you could get from that. Treating stormwater with green infrastructure, so you get those additional benefits. And then thinking about how to retain buildings there, reuse them, or at least build in ways that were consistent with the character of the neighborhood. So for each of those, there's a small, medium, and large. And this image is sort of, this is from Portland, was the idea of like, what could the large look like? So any project can pick from these different menu items, and then they can sort of pick and choose from different ones. Maybe they want a little bit of green infrastructure and a little bit of affordable housing, but they don't want to go all the way to 3 points of affordable housing. So it's very flexible with the understanding that as the community sees big buildings go up, they know that they're getting things that were in their plan. The other thing it does is create more predictability in the development review process, which has been a major issue in this neighborhood and many other neighborhoods. We're seeing just a huge amount of variances because the zoning wasn't matching up with where the development was. So in this case, it's height. We did a project after this where we expanded the riverfront areas, and there's other things that we offered up in the riverfront areas, getting closer to the river, which a lot of development wanted to do, for example. And then we're going to keep tracking the system and optimizing because it is a real work in progress. So we will get different buildings at different scales that use more or less of this system, and this rendering sort of starts to show that. And that's to be expected. That's sort of the goal. We want people to use these points as much as they can, knowing that each time that they do, we're getting a little bit closer to the vision in the plan. We did then model what this could look like cumulatively across the neighborhood. And so we were very careful in doing this to match sort of surrounding heights and not try to blow out the sort of character of the neighborhood. That was real concern for people, that somehow this might flip everything. That has not happened, but we have seen steady growth in development in a neighborhood that had not seen much. So there is more interest in development here. And you can see we are predominantly looking at infill. We have not seen a lot of new demolition, for example, as a result of this work. The other thing that happened is that we did get our bus rapid transit proposal funded. And so that is moving towards final design right now, and which is exciting to see. And so the community will start to see construction and the movement for that project. We talked about district energy. We're now in that stage that we had talked about in the planning process, with just figuring out how to extend it throughout the neighborhood. It's one thing to have it in one part of the neighborhood, but we really want to get it all the way up and down 5th and Forbes as we rebuild the streets for BRT. And then we don't own a lot of property in the neighborhood as the city and our redevelopment authority, but we own a little bit. And so one of the sites that we own is 2 acres right in the middle of it. So we did a lot of work with the community to really design up what should happen there. We put it into an RFP for development proposals, and we got a local developer that was able to meet that. So it has public open space in it. It has affordable housing. It has affordable retail and a lot of plazas and park spaces that the community can use. As Andrew noted, not much in the way of public space in that neighborhood. And then the implementation of the plan and working with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and some of these other institutional partners helped to create a different program where we actually work collaboratively with large institutions on master planning. So now we're getting into the weeds and not asking what's required in the code, but actually what can we do that achieves maximum performance? How can the universities, the hospitals really push the bar of what's possible? So we bring together a big group of staff from different agencies and from nonprofit partners, including the Green Building Alliance, and we start to work through the projects, understand them, set targets, increase those targets over a course of meetings, and then it's been very successful so far, and we're looking at how we can roll that out for private developers across the city. This is one of those projects. So, in that list was reducing the energy of this hospital, the energy use intensity by 60%, which is pretty outstanding. We also packed in a art museum and public art projects and turned a landscape area into a small parklet. So there were a lot of things that came out of just sort of rethinking some of these things that they were already planning to do or thinking about doing, and really thinking about how they could fit into this vision for the community around sustainability and equity. Another project that we pushed forward in design was the idea of a big trail network. There's a great hillside between this area and the rest of the Hill District, and many discussions about how to take advantage of that hillside. So we created this concept master plan for a trail, and now we're working on trying to fund the first design implementation phase for this. So it's a bike and ped trail, and it gives people a way to get into nature. This is a very urbanized area. The last project I'll touch on real quick is just an example of how things grow over time. In the plan, the idea here was that we had Tustin Park on one side of the street and a community garden on the other. We wanted to expand and improve them and then connect them across the street with some sort of new paving and traffic calming. When we did outreach following the plan to sort of work on the concept master plan for the park, what we found out is a lot of the housing heads who were backup issues, and we saw the potential to invest in that housing to overcome that issue, make other improvements to make them healthier, more affordable homes, and then lock in that affordability for the longer term. So the goal here is to work with a big group of partners to get to an improved park space wrapped by affordable housing and residents that have been there all the way along. So that's some of the things that are coming out of thinking about the vision and the goals, and then getting down into the weeds of these projects and seeing how much each project can actually do to implement those bigger, grander visions. We do have a bunch of links in the presentation, but otherwise that's it for our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. It's a huge effort. And I know I have some questions I want to ask, but if anyone else has questions, like I said, just put those in the Q&A and we will get to those toward the end. But thank you both. And we will, by the way, be posting these slides on the website, and I'll share the link for that in a bit. So you can go find these links so you don't have to write them down. With that, I will invite David, if you want to share your screen.
Certainly, and I will start that now.
Great. Well, while you're doing that, I'll just remind people the second project we'll be hearing from is the Heartwood Greenway system in Omaha, Nebraska. We've got some representatives from MSLA to talk with us about that today.
Okay, does everybody see?
I'm just seeing your video. I think you might want to share your screen again.
How about if I get my mug off the... Let me try to do that first. I can't seem to do that.
Huh. Is it giving you an...
I can't get rid of myself. That's a problem. Oh well, let's roll with this.
All right. Do you want me to pull it up on my end, or?
How are we doing now? We good?
I'm still seeing just your video.
Okay.
We'll get there. Let's see here. If you go to that third button from the left, is that the one you've been? There we go. I think it's doing. Your video is off now. There we go. Looks like it's coming up. Perfect.
I can't see it now. Okay, let me try again.
No problem.
Are you good now?
I'm not seeing your screen.
Okay.
Looks like it's loading. Great. Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Whew. I always have these problems. Anyhow, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Meyer, and with me today is my team of managers and designers, Nicole Kelly, Eric Jensen, Grace Amundsen, and Sophie Nicolaidou. They deserve a lot of credit for what I'm about to show, so kudos to them. I'd also like to thank the American Planning Association and all of you for joining us today. It's an honor to be here. And what I'm about to show you is a project that springs from good planning, but it's really a story about infrastructure and beauty. My team and I are in the middle of designing and building a place that has given us the opportunity to transform infrastructure, specifically flood control infrastructure, into something artful, evocative, and distinctive. And that place is called Heartwood Preserve in Omaha, Nebraska, a place that you all know in Nebraska where big moves were required to accommodate infrastructure with a grand scale that was expressed in potent ways. I'll give you a little bit of context. It's a 500-acre site for Heartwood that was once part of Boys Town, an institution founded by Father Flanagan to care for orphans. A vestige of farmland that had been surrounded by urban sprawl. The site is also within a watershed that has been ravaged by unprecedented floods. The Omaha community has suffered more than $1 billion in damages over the past few years. Farms have been shuttered and families have lost homes. Our client, Applied Underwriters, purchased the site for a mixed-use development that includes their corporate campus. So reshaping and rethinking the watershed for flood control was essential for the development. And I'll circle back to that theme of flood control in a minute. But first, I'll provide you with an orientation of the development. Here is the 40-acre parcel dedicated to Applied Underwriters headquarters, a 25-acre central park adjacent to Boys Town, a pedestrian promenade, and an extensive greenway system that included more than 14 miles of park trails, allowing us to link the site together and connect to the surrounding community. Back to the headquarters site, where their building was located on the highest point of the site. We wanted to take advantage of the expansive southern views. And to make that possible, all of the parking for 1,000 cars is being located below grade and out of sight. This allowed us to expand the extent of the landscape to roll right up to the building, enhancing the feel of headquarters as a pavilion within the park. And this is how one approaches headquarters from the north. With it being limited to bikes and deliveries, it really helped us reinforce the Arcadian spirit that we were after. The entry lane bridges over a newly formed vessel of water and around a sculpted landform that was constructed from the earth excavated to create the water feature. This is back to the Central Park. And this is an enlarged plan of the park that includes a bottomland collection dedicated to stormwater vessels. I'll get back to that in a minute. It included an amphitheater suited to serve over 15,000 people, an informal field for summer soccer, and then ice skating during the winter, a playground, a central plaza in Belvedere that overlooks Boys Town, and temporary gardens that will hold court until the market halls are built in the future. Now I'll show you a few illustrations of the park. This is looking at the park's entry from the north. These walls frame the amphitheater beyond, providing a buffer from traffic, and with the integration of water, really creates a landmark gateway into the development. This is a perspective of the playground. And beyond, on the right, you can see a silo and a barn. This barn that once served the Boys Town farm is being preserved, relocated, and repurposed to serve the community with shelter, bathrooms, concessions, and recall the history of the farm. The silo will have an integrated elevator to provide access to the haymow above and sets up a great overlook to the playground on one side and the sports field on the other. The central plaza is arranged to accommodate food trucks and farmers markets. And adjacent to the plaza are the temporary gardens that provide picnic areas and the grounds for community gardens and seasonal events such as Easter egg hunts and corn mazes in the fall. This is the pedestrian promenade that is called the Row. It's going to be framed by housing and retail at street level, and then it will link the park to the greenways. And now I want to circle back to stormwater management, as it's really the big event of the greenways. With more than 130 acres of open space composed of native prairie and forest ecologies, the greenways gave us the necessary grounds to store 170 acre-feet of stormwater. When we first interviewed for this project, the engineers had already built a series of unremarkable ponds that were pushed to the boundaries of the project. They were all about function, but they weren't functioning so well. And with the epic storm events, erosion and siltation were quickly undermining the ponds. Supported by Applied Underwriters' desire to go beyond the expected, our team got on board and created a new vision for the site, one that was determined to approach the hyper-efficient hydraulic infrastructure in an artful manner. And the backbone of that hydraulic infrastructure is a series of stylized vessels that you can see here highlighted in light blue. Here are some of our study models that help us tell the story to our client and the community. While the vessels are all designed to collect stormwater, they're all distinct because each one needed to respond to a different context and program. On the left is what we call the cosmic bowl. With a diameter of more than 400 feet, it is the largest of them all. If necessary, these vessels need to hold a total of 55 million gallons of water, so each one is a really big footprint on the landscape. And each translates into a clearing, whether full of water, marshy, or dry. The vessels and their surroundings become poetic reveals of the constantly changing landscape. Here's the cosmic bowl again with a windmill on axis that is being repurposed at the high point of the site. The cosmic bowl is notable because it harkens back to the historic pothole prairies of Nebraska. We also honor the agrarian past by planting an orchard that sweeps between two of the crescent vessels. It's our nod to Arbor Day, which originated in Nebraska. We have a projection of over 10,000 trees to be planted throughout the development, and to make that possible, we're establishing our own nurseries within the greenways. And this gave birth to a pretty cool program where every applied underwriters employee gets to plant a memorial sapling to be planted within the park or on the corporate headquarters grounds. What about the trees that had to be removed to make way for the clearings? We'll be replanting them throughout the park as totems at key thresholds. And as they decay over time, the totems will provide habitat for native woodpeckers, chickadees, and nuthatches. The vessels also set up all sorts of activities within the park, no matter the season. And studded within the clearings are all sorts of amenities like council rings, fire pits, mini amphitheaters, all with mannered forms to provide a strong contrast to the informal groves of native trees. Here's an illustration of one of the crescent vessels, nearly a quarter mile across and 16 feet deep. Like all 12 vessels, it's framed with split-faced limestone blocks, all mined from a Midwestern quarry. And at the center of the crescent, we celebrate water as it enters the vessel. This will give you a sense of scale. Here's a close-up of the incoming stormwater pipe, which was integrated into the limestone with weathered steel. Each vessel also has an overflow catch basin, which allows water to slowly drain after major storms. And in the name of beauty, we're concealing all the catch basins with sculptural stone cairns. Recently completed, the first vessel is already hard at work, recharging the aquifers and serving frogs, birds, and all sorts of Nebraska critters. Over time, 15 years, 100 years, nature will leave its mark on the stone and tell a story, and hopefully encourage us to notice and remember something that we might have otherwise missed. With most of Nebraska's land having been transformed into agriculture, rich topsoil has eroded away, and only a fraction of the native landscape remains. So of course, we're taking a restorative approach to the ecological infrastructure by planting native prairie and woodlands, revitalizing soil, water, vegetation, and the wildlife that depends on them. And that's more essential than ever. But thankfully, these practices are now standards of our trade that reach all the way back to Olmsted. We think that Meyer Studios' mission goes beyond that. What we're doing here is more of an ecological art form. Throughout the site, in monumental and intimate ways, we're fusing art with natural elements. At Heartwood, we took a very demanding set of functional requirements and cast them into a harmonious collection of earthworks. I hope that as landscape architects and planners, we can work together to live up to the age and bring an aesthetic sensibility to how we respond to the effects of climate change. Thanks again for joining us. What else can we tell you?
Great. Thank you so much, David. Two very different projects, but really, really lovely. So yeah, thank you to all of our presenters for speaking with us. If anyone has any questions for anyone, please submit them via the Q&A. Chat function, works as well. Either way is fine. But I will get us started. So one thing I love to know about these sort of award-winning projects is, obviously there's so many components to these, and there's so many results you can talk about. But when you think about the design or planning process here, what are some of your, or one even of your favorite sort of innovations that came out of your work? Is there something specific that you as a professional are taking away to use in other efforts? I certainly am taking things that I saw in these efforts, but from your process, for both of these projects, are there specific things that you're taking forward?
Well, I'll speak to Heartwood for a second. I would have to say this is almost a commission of a lifetime for us. It is so rare to have the scale of the landscape to work with, where we can apply ecology and climate change infrastructure at an effective scale. That's the difference maker for us. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, you don't do this without a supporting client. Applied Underwriters made it possible to be brave and take on the engineering requirements in an artful manner. That doesn't happen often. I hope that it can happen again. And there's no reason why it can't.
Great, thank you.
I think for Pittsburgh, I think one of the things that we learned were, just ways to think about, levers that we hadn't, like policy change or levers that we hadn't necessarily used in the past to try to make sure that we're tying them to community goals. When Derek had talked about whether it was, how we were changing zoning to incentivize district energy because the community wanted to be more sustainable, or whether it was around how we kind of led with affordability to allow people the opportunity for more development in the neighborhood, to some of the ways that even from not necessarily in a regulatory way, but just by meeting with large property owners earlier and trying to be able to shape their development, that we could do a better job of having those things that residents told us in a block party be something that happened in the things that got built in their neighborhood.
Great, thank you. Like I said, please submit questions, but I'll keep running through mine until anyone else submits them. But Derek, if you wouldn't mind, if we go back to the EcoInnovation District Plan, you mentioned you've been working collaboratively with some institutions on master planning. You mentioned universities, hospital, setting targets and sort of working toward them over the course of sort of several meetings with the same group. So I was wondering if you could talk about any specific outcomes that have come from that effort. I think a lot of planning processes often include these sort of elephants in the room of these big institutions, but it's often kind of nebulous of how to move forward together. So I'd love to hear any takeaways you had from that effort, or Andrew, either of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So I think one of the things that at least we've run into is that the goals and desires of cities, city government, and universities are not terribly far apart, and we operate similarly in many respects. And so there's sort of a shared understanding of having visionary goals, but then having to figure out ways to implement those, and having pretty dynamic constituencies to respond to. And so I think it's our problem wasn't necessarily in working with these institutions that they didn't have the same objectives around decarbonization or around rethinking energy. It's that they were struggling with how to balance those desires with other desires within the university system. So, the demand for more investment in sports venues versus the demand for moving everything towards net zero, or maintaining tree canopy at the same time that they were proposing 25 or 26 new buildings, and often on places that had been pervious. So I think what we sort of learned by doing was that we were sort of both learning and both sort of growing through the process. And so there were ideas that we had from sort of a neighborhood or citywide planning perspective, or experiences that we'd had that were beneficial to them, to help them think through how to do sort of a plan that's very similar in scale and duration and intent to what we do. And then I think on the other end of it, it was helpful to understand a lot more about the decision-making process within a university, and how many different limitations there are, and how many different sort of processes there are internally to get to, a new building or a new facility or a new program. And so what we found over time is that our groups would grow. So not only the staff and the people that we brought to our meetings grew during the first two of these that we did, but also increasingly the universities brought in more and more people to these meetings. So we would end up with these, particularly for large universities like the University of Pittsburgh, we would end up in these meetings with like 20 people from the University of Pittsburgh, and some of them were academics, and some of them were directors of the sustainability program, or they were facility people. There were people that ran energy programs, mobility programs, and it was interesting to have sort of wide-ranging discussions about the future of a campus or an institution in relation to the future of the city and the neighborhood. And so I think there were just a lot of great things that came out of the collaboration. And I would say also the relationship building that happened through that process actually has helped us a lot since those processes. So it's definitely helped us to open up some of those big, a lot of times the community see these institutions as big bullies or having way too much power. But I think it sort of unpacks that a little bit. And so then as we go into a neighborhood plan in Oakland, which is my current project, where all these universities are, that they're able to sort of better understand the community perspective and what we're trying to achieve with the neighborhood plan, because they've been through something very similar with their campus plan. And they can understand that there are things that they have to offer and experiences that they've got from that are relevant to a long range plan for a bigger community.
Great, thanks. That's useful to hear sort of how you thought about that process and how it benefited you. So thank you for that answer. I want to go back to David or anyone else with the Heartwood Greenway team. So, you were talking about parking, and I think I heard you say that all parking was below grade, and I wrote down all parking below grade with an exclamation point, because to me, seeing that large site, it's kind of a surprise that would be the decision. But I think, given the goals that you had for stormwater management and whatnot, it certainly makes sense. But I was wondering if you could talk a bit about, was there a sort of how that came to be, and was that sort of a decision coming into it, or was that something that was arrived at?
Well, I would say it was a programmatic direction from the client. The client really is invested in the spirit of the landscape. And it wasn't our recommendation. We can do beautiful parking lots. It's hard to do a beautiful parking lot without providing proper space for trees. That's typically what happens is you just get a sea of asphalt and the parking lots aren't so beautiful. But we take them on as an opportunity to make gardens. But we had some studies that treated the landscape differently, but all studies had parking under the building. And that really was a directive from the client. There's not even a parking spot at the front of the building. When you come up to the motor court, there's a drop off and then you loop right back out. I don't think I've ever worked on a project where there's not one surface parking available on the project. You enter the parking garages through two different roadways off the side that go into the garage below, but the front approach to the project is purely landscape.
Wow, yeah, it's certainly noteworthy. I also had a question, David. You were walking us through. I mean, obviously, both of your projects have such just beautiful graphics that really tell a story. But you had a graphic where you talked about sort of, I think, replanting trees that had needed to be removed and sort of their role in the landscape. And I was wondering if you could speak more about that.
Sure.
It was interesting to me to hear.
Well, we didn't want to lose any trees on the project. But we had some cases where some of the existing trees just had to give way to the footprints for these large vessels that had to be made. We fought hard to keep every tree that we could, but for those that we couldn't keep, we wanted to salvage and keep their spirit on the site. So existing trees that have to be removed are either going to be, the ones that have been cut down have been salvaged, they're stockpiled, we're going to make site furnishings out of them. And then for the ones that we are going to use for totems, they're really memorials to the trees that we lost. So we want their spirit to remain on site and be acknowledged that they gave their way for something else.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you for the answer.
I've never planted dead trees before, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah, that's what caught my eye. But I thought the way you spoke about it and their role, I thought it was very inspiring. It was great to hear. I have one more question I would love to ask. Again, back to the EcoInnovation District team. When you were talking about these community infrastructure hubs, where I think it was sort of an option for people who are developing projects to include, two of a set of different community sort of amenities. I think it was something like composting and whatnot. I was wondering if you could speak more about that. Does that come out of the eco district concept, or where did that come from?
Yeah, it did actually. So one of the things that we tried to do in the planning process was rethink infrastructure and rethink the kinds of investments that were already happening in the community and merge the two. So we were getting a lot of parking structures. The neighborhood was getting a lot of parking structures. I think there was an assumption that those would continue to be developed given the location. So we were trying to figure out ways that we could use these market drivers to provide things that the built form of the neighborhood just weren't able to provide. Again, this is a row house neighborhood, so very few people here have off-street parking or garages. So EV charging was one of those things. The high amount of speculation of land means there isn't a ton of land around for things like composting that can be used because everything's been sort of captured by speculators. And then because of its location, a lot of people are getting around by bike and foot. And so trying to figure out ways that we could create bike share hubs was a key piece of that. And we had different ideas in the plan, actually, that are maybe more traditional of we could, we sort of plotted out different places, different kinds of configurations. We even looked at whether the surface parking could be a place to put this kind of infrastructure into the neighborhood. And we kept coming back to is we just don't want surface parking. So we didn't want to find ways to make surface parking okay because it was consistently the thing that the neighborhood was struggling against. And so that's how we came to this idea of we need to make peace with the idea that people are going to keep building structured parking, at least for the near term. Have a long-term strategy about what that can be converted into, and we don't expect and we don't hope that people are going to be coming to the neighborhood by car every time. And then what can it give us in the meantime? And so there is a menu of 11 things, so it's quite flexible. And we have the first one of these that we saw actually used the stormwater. Chose stormwater because they can actually treat stormwater from the street on the site, which is sort of unusual to treat the municipal stormwater flow in addition to their own projects. So we did see people take up things like that, and I guess that makes sense because it fits into contracts they had. They had, landscape architects and engineers already doing a bunch of site work, and so they could just expand the size of their facilities and be able to check that one off. The public art one was another one that was utilized. I suspect that it's going to be different for every project, and we've only had one project that's come through to build a big structured parking garage since we put this in place. But I think a lot of it is sort of turning a market driver that is often considered a negative externality of what's going on in the neighborhood and trying to flip it a little bit and make it a positive for the neighborhood and a way to implement their longer term strategies around sustainability and access to different kinds of resources.
Great. Well, thank you, Derek. That's interesting. I think it's a concept to consider for sure. Well, with that, I think we can wrap up here. But thank you to all of our speakers again for joining us. Thank you to all of you for being on the line. Like I said, I will be posting the presentations and the recording. Give me about 24 hours, but it'll be posted on our website. And so, you can go in there and see some of those links that you may have missed that were in there. But thank you all. And I hope we see you maybe next week on our webinar. Happens at the same time, Thursday at 1:00.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Derek. I enjoyed your presentation.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too, David.